Please note that the information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing discussed should be interpreted as specific legal advice or as creating an attorney-client relationship. If you have questions about your organization or situation, we encourage you to connect with your own local counsel. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Solutions. I'm your host, Hunter Pettis, and I'm glad you're tuning in today. We've got a powerful episode ahead. If you've ever worried about your passwords, your data, or your organization's digital safety, this one's for you. Joining me in conversation is not one, not two, but three amazing guests. So before we get started, let me spend some time introducing them. First up, we have Ernest Staats, a security, privacy, and GRC consultant with Information Sentinel and the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventist Technical DPO. Ernest brings over 20 years of experience helping nonprofit hospitals and schools build smart, sustainable security programs. He has a wall of certifications: CISSP, Security Plus, Network Plus, and many more. And somehow he makes it all look easy. Next, I also have Tony Vargas, one of my amazing coworkers here at ARM. He is our VP of Information and Technology Services, and he also wears many hats: CIO, CISO, and DPO. Tony brings more than 35 years of experience from virtualization and disaster recovery to data privacy. He's worked across government, public safety, healthcare, and, of course, insurance. But what really sets him apart is how he makes cybersecurity understandable and actionable. And finally, I'd like to say hello to Darla Avendano, another amazing coworker on our team here at ARN. She's a senior account producer in our insurance services department and holds certifications in AAI, AU, and CYB. She's been a huge asset to ARM for 24 years, especially in our work with Beasley, helping clients understand and manage cybersecurity. Ernest, Tony, Darla, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
So I probably gave started our audience off with quite the alphabet soup, and I know that cybersecurity is full of acronyms and the CIO and CISSP and all of these, and it almost feels like you need to learn a second language to truly understand cybersecurity. But I think a good place for us to probably start is a little bit more foundational. So I'm going to kind of pose this question to Tony, actually. How would we actually define cybersecurity for our listeners?
Sure. Thanks, Hunter. Well, one of the things that I like to do, especially with a layperson when we start talking cybersecurity, is to help them get an understanding around what that is. And so I'll give some examples. So when you think about security in general, you often think about physical security. So we think about our keys, locking the windows, locking our cars. Then we start to think about, as you grow up, you think about your identity security. So your security surrounding credit cards. You rip up the credit card offers you get in the mail so somebody can't get a card in your name. Making sure that you don't leave your mailbox full of mail for a long period of time. So just like you think of those items as security in your everyday life, you think about cybersecurity very similar, except it's in the digital world, right? So we all have usernames and passwords on various systems, from social media to our banking, even shopping nowadays. And so cybersecurity really is, for the average person, basically our digital identity. And there could be multiple digital identities that we have tied to various email accounts and organizations that we do business with. Cybersecurity can also surround things like your emails themselves that you use to communicate with these various entities that I just mentioned.
Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. And I think you're beginning to touch on a few elements that I know in the cyber world you refer to attacks from bad actors. Maybe I'll move around the fictitious room, if you will, and kind of jump over to Ernest. And would you be willing to address or talk about bad actors and what they how they can typically cause harm to an organization?
Absolutely. Bad actors are that's a nice way of saying, or a more understandable way of saying, like a hacker. Oh, people think of hackers, they're a bad actor. They want to steal information. They typically do this, and they've done it with some of the Adventist organizations and some of the others by faking people's voices, making spoof telephone calls, making spoof video calls, even Zoom meetings and stuff. It's really simple to do nowadays with the artificial intelligence. It makes it easy to clone a voice or clone a person, so that way you think you're talking to a real person. So this is what hackers will do. They'll try to typically impersonate. The ultimate goal is either for money or information. And the reason they want information is to sell information. And I've had a lot of people tell me, "Well, Ernest, I don't have anything that I don't care if the world knows." Really? And I tell them, "Do you really want to go to the restroom in a glass bathroom?" They're like, "No, not really." I said, "Well, then you have something you care about, and there's probably certain things you care about as well, and we just don't realize, because it could be used in a way that's not how you intended." So you could take pictures of your children and post it in a way that you wouldn't want them to be, or of your parents, and misrepresent the total picture and you as a person. So it's not just that they're going to always steal your information, but sometimes they'll misrepresent you to someone else. And that's what the ultimately the hackers are after. Their goal is money and information, however they can get to it. So
Yeah, I know. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily fearful of AI, but anybody who's been using their phone or been on the internet definitely sees the uptick in the utilization of AI. Sometimes it's just to create a false narrative. Other times it's just to make a funny video. But either way, there's definitely bad actors out there that are using any type of technology that they can to manipulate people into, like you said, getting money or information. I know we spend quite a bit of time here with NGO learning that. So that's always interesting to just be abreast on a lot of that information. I mean, what would actually a hacker, a bad actor got their hands on some of this information? What could actually potentially happen? And I don't know if Darla wants to answer this question.
Well, we had a good Ninja training video a week or so ago that was talking about if you were in the office or you're on your laptop and you get one of those pop up boxes that says, click here to confirm that this is you logging into whatever the system is. And then now there's a tweak to that where, yeah, click to verify that you're a human and not a robot. But then now the hack is now click this other little field that's going to run a script on your computer. Well, that then gets the hacker access to your data. They could track your key strokes, which then they could figure out what your passwords are on some of the different portals you're logging into. So that's one of hacking tools that they use. I know a lot of my older friends, right? We've seen the little text that comes in on your phone. Hey, this is UPS. We have a package to send you, but we don't know what your address is. Well, if UPS knew who I am, they know how to get they know what
Yes.
my address is. And so to type it in there, you're just giving the actor more information about you that you shouldn't be necessarily sharing in that situation. The social engineering, different emails and phone calls where, oh, hey, this is the president of your organization. This is your pastor, right? I need 5 gift cards of $100. That's another situation where it's a social hacking, a social engineering situation. And so, yeah, like Ernest said, they're looking for your information or they're looking for a way to get to your money.
And Hunter, what Ernest and Darla are alluding to here is really the fact that information is now the new oil, if you
Yes.
will. They're mining information. I mean, all of us have had an opportunity where you've been saying something or having a conversation, and then suddenly there's an ad popping up on your stream on one of the social media platforms that's on that particular topic. Well, it's because the phones are listening to you, listening to conversations. They're mining your information to see what you're looking for example. And so are the bad actors. They're mining your information. They want to steal your information so that they can, one, use it against you, or sell it. And
Definitely.
so, and that's the primary goal of the bad actors. Information is so pervasive out there; it's everywhere, and so that's the ultimate goal of these bad actors. Whether it's in a private hack that they're trying to employ on you, or whether it's through on a company level, it's all about information.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I know you had mentioned at the beginning of this conversation a little bit about how most of us, by default, we always do what we can to secure things physical, our homes, our cars, we lock them, make sure that they're kept safe. And so I guess you could say our property and our assets. But when it comes to our digital identity or our footprint online, we may be a little bit more lax. We may use the same password for multiple websites and things of that
Right.
nature. And especially probably when it comes to the church, we may just default to LNG White being our password for everything. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, how do we fortify this digital identity for our churches as well, or organizations, to be more secure and more thorough about that as well?
There's lots of ways to do that, but the first thing to do, at least from coming from a corporate perspective, is that one of the biggest risks that we see happen frequently is that people aren't separating their work environment from their home environment. So people will tend to use their work email address to set up their kid's school account, for example, so they don't have to remember multiple email addresses, or they'll use it on social media. And those social media platforms or personal platforms are much easier to hack or more frequently a target than the corporate systems are. And so what happens is if those personal systems get hacked, then they can now target, because they have your work email. They actually then know where you work. They can target your work environment, and often that will give them access to your work email. So we see that actually time and time again. So making sure that you separate your work information, your credentials, and from your personal is a really important step, along with making sure that you use separate passwords for the various systems. Don't ever reuse. And of course, then multi-factor. Maybe Ernest wants to touch on what multi-factor is and how that helps.
Absolutely. Well, and as Tony said, so if I'm using multiple passwords, one of the things I oftentimes have people tell me, Ernest, how do I remember them all? And that's a great question. I have hundreds of passwords for different places that I work with, and I don't remember them all. I use what's called a password manager. I use one, it's called Proton Pass. You can also use LastPass, One Password. Both, all three of those are different password managers. You have to remember one master password that is long. That's one that's a long phrase, and actually, it's recommended to use a passphrase instead of a password. So, like the lyric from one of your favorite songs, like 3 or 4 sentences, long. So it's then once you've got that one password that's really long, then from there, you can go ahead and you can then have all your other passwords, and it'll store your passwords. And then using what's called MFA or multi-factor, first you have a username and a password, and then you either use an application. Google has a multi-factor authentication, or you can use a token, like this guy right here. This right here is a YubiKey, and I plug it into my phone or into my computer, and I can plug it right in, and it's my multi-factor. So I put in my username, my password, I plug this in, I press the buttons on the side, then it gives me another way that's very hard to hack. Someone has to have access to my multi-factor token. So unless they've got my key ring, there's no way they're getting into that account. So again, these are the ways that you can do. Oftentimes people say, well, I use text messages for a multi-factor. Is that good? It's okay, but it's not great. It's really easy to intercept text messages, actually. So because of that, if we think that's our secure method, don't use that. And one of the things that Tony hit on that I really want to emphasize, do not reuse passwords over, not just for personal, but common Adventist passwords. Not to mention any names, but 1844 is a really great password that is used all over the Adventist church. So again, that's something that shouldn't be, because it's a common date. It has to do with the Adventist history and heritage. So because it has to do with our heritage, again, you want to pull something out. So on a personal level, don't use your birth date. Don't use your children's birth dates. So don't do things that can easily be tied back to you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, That makes a ton of sense, and I can relate. I know I've been victim of using the same password over and over again, but the more I learn about cybersecurity, I'm making sure that I'm more thorough about changing my passwords and using more complex passwords or passphrases. So I think that that's helpful. One thing that may be lingering in the minds of our listeners, and you kind of each one of you have hinted at a little bit as we were going through this conversation, but I mean, realistically, if a bad actor or hacker got a hold of church information, how big of an impact could that actually be? I mean, let's say I'm small town Oklahoma. Sorry, Oklahoma. Let's think from Oklahoma. I don't mean to pick on you guys, but and it's only a few members. How vulnerable is our information truly, and how could that have an impact on the church?
Well, that's one of the common things that when I talk to a church or work with a church, they say, "Well, we're a small church. We don't have any information that's important." But the fact is that they do. Usually, even if it's on a notepad or if it's in the computer itself, often they'll have church membership, for example, the membership roll. So the names and addresses, sometimes phone numbers of the people who are going to the church. And that can be used in a number of ways. From one, it gives them the contact information of the people. So it gives them their names and information. That's called personally identifiable information. So it helps the bad actor identify who their targets are. It also gives them the ability to sound legitimate. So they call and they can now pretend that they know your deacons' names. They can refer to your elders or your pastor. So it really makes them sound very credible. This is why, for example, Beasley, they have certain requirements to make sure that you protect information that's being accessed from outside the organization. It's all about controlling that data so that can be used in ways. And there's many, many more ways that data can be used.
A lot of the carriers are looking for cyber controls to be in place. Doesn't matter who the carrier is. Everybody is looking, are you protecting your data, right? The ransomware simulations, the training on the cyber controls, the Ninjio training, right? All of those are controls that should be in place that will help you identify if something happens. With the ransomware, the disruption for your church organization, you may not be able to get into your data. Sometimes that can go on for some people think it's going to be quick, but it may take you a month or so to get back into your systems. Vendor analytics, your third party vendor relationships. Is your cloud provider have controls in place so that if your church system gets bombarded with a bunch of emails, what's that called, Tony, when they flood you with emails?
Well, it was emails or, well, of course, that's just spamming you, but it could turn into a denial of service. So you're getting so
Yes,
much
right?
traffic
Yes.
coming to your email or to your network connection that you can't conduct business.
And if your system doesn't have any controls that will put up the gate to say, to protect your data, then that could be a serious problem. A lot of the carriers are looking to ensure that you have these controls in place before they'll offer a quote for some of the organizations who don't have coverage yet. So it's important that we put the controls in place and that we understand how this applies in our personal lives and for the corporate organizations within the church.
I think that's critical, helping people to understand that at the fundamental level. So I'll pick on someone as an example. Oh, he's my father. He's a retired farmer. You know, his computer got hacked. He got brought in by what's called a tech support scam. They called him up and said, Your internet's going slow, isn't it? We always think our internet could be faster." So of course he fell for it. And he's like, "Well, yeah, it'd be great." And so they got on his computer. After they were on for about an hour, he calls me on the phone. He's like, "I know you've talked to me about
Right?
cybersecurity. I know you've talked to me." He goes, "I made a mistake." And I said, "Okay, Dad, just unplug it, turn off the phone with them, and ship me your computer." It was amazing. Now, my dad does nothing electronic. He's a farmer. He's anti-technology. So he had no banking, nothing. What did they do with his computer? They used his computer to create an attacking computer to attack other people's computers. It was very sophisticated. Even if I did something that's called a completely wipe of his hard drive, they actually went into the firmware or the basic how the hardware works, rewrote that So even if I was to reformat the computer, it would go back and start attacking people again. It was really sophisticated. And he's just, a retired farmer, in the country. But they were going to use his internet connection to attack someone else. So I've seen this happen at small churches too. Well, we don't have anything. And well, you actually probably might have a pretty decent connection to the internet because you stream your services. So they might want to use your computers to attack someone else. And people don't realize this. Again, they're leveraging, if you don't have information, then they will leverage your internet connection or something else to gather somebody else's information. So that's one of the key aspects when you're thinking about this is not only what would I possibly be sharing, but what could they use of mine to hurt someone else? And this is really underlines the whole reason we do this. If in order for people to believe the message that we've been entrusted with, they need to feel like they can trust us. And if we are attacking them, or if they get in a newspaper that some small church hacked, the government, well, what are they doing? What do they really believe? It's going to challenge people's beliefs on, are they even, what they have to say is even right, let alone is it something I can trust? So it's about maintaining the trust at our local organizations that we're here to serve the Lord and we're doing it in an honorable and integrous way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Hunter, and I
man.
think there's some other things that we could give you examples for that people just don't really think about. Just like Ernest described, how your computer can be used against others. You don't think about that.
Right.
But for example, one of the things we don't think about is our kids. All of our kids nowadays have credentials. They have logins to social media platforms, things like that. Probably way more than you know. Even gaming systems now connect to the internet. The old Sega, or Atari of the days, those didn't, but the new
Yeah.
ones do. And so they're talking to other people live and things like that. So there's the social aspect of that. But then from our kids' perspective, they're not really using their credit today, but they will down the road, when they turn 18. And so one of the things, for example, in our academies, our schools, the bad actors would love to get their hands on the kids' information because they can then mimic those kids and then start using their credit and do a bunch of nefarious things, stack up a whole bunch of bad credit against their accounts, and then you don't know, and then they go finance their first car when they're in college or whenever, and suddenly they have bad credit. And so we have to even protect our kids' credit, and all the more important reason why our schools, academies, and even us as adults protecting our kids' digital data or their digital footprint needs to be taken very seriously.
Yeah, these I'm learning a lot from this conversation. I will have to say because wow, I that you all beat me to the punch a little bit because I was going to ask some things that we are challenged with. I'll say on the property side of things is that our suggestions or our recommendations when it comes to securing assets, it seems like we're impeding on ministry a little bit. And I think that what you all just shared, actually puts things into perspective when it comes to protecting those things that we've been entrusted with to protect. I do, however, would like to ask, because this has been quite a bit of information and there's probably listeners who are at different levels or points on the spectrum. What could be something that you would recommend from this conversation that they can begin to do and start to do today? Like, where should members start, regardless of their size? They're building their cyber risk program from scratch.
One of the key aspects is guarding your passwords, starting there and not reusing your passwords. That's the first entryway. Making sure that your computers are patched and updated and that your phone is patched and updated. These are some of the basic steps of it, keeping your device secure so then you can secure with other people. There's also a guide that, I can share out with people that actually walks through the common scams and how to protect yourself from the common scams and how scammers typically try to approach people, the methods they use, and then what you can do. The biggest thing is to first take a breath, slow down. Anything that someone's trying to push you into making a
Yeah.
quick buy or a quick, I need this right away, anything that's urgent or pressing, take a step back and say, I can't do this right now. I'm sorry. We will come back to this. So anything that's got a time constraint or where they're trying to put pressure or emotional pressure on you, be very cautious of that. So always go a little bit slower with that. And then make sure that you're always questioning. So if someone's calling you and asking for something, ask them questions. If they're pretending or you think it sounds like it's your children or your parents, ask them an inside joke so that they know you know who they are. Just to verify. So verify the information every time you get a call from your bank, verify it. Don't just verify them, hang up, call them back. So always use a verification method. That's a couple things that I would recommend.
I was going to talk about verification as well. That's an easy, right? You get your church electric statement usually comes from this specific vendor, and you notice that it's a new vendor now. Don't just pay it. Take the couple of minutes, call them and say, did we change vendors? Because that's another social engineering hack where the hacker will send, and if we're just, oh, let me pay it quick, and we didn't verify, then suddenly now we sent our electric bill money to a hacker. And then we've got problems. So verification, that's so simple and easy. If a lot of one of the other scams is, oh no, it's your kid calling and I've been kidnapped, the inside joke, the something to know, that you can verify that's really who it is. Those are easy, simple tips.
Yeah, Hunter, from my perspective, everything they're saying here, Ernest and Darla, is 100% accurate. When it comes down to it, my advice is to have a plan. Whether you are an individual, a family, a church, or a large
Yes.
organization like our conferences or above, we all should have a plan. What is it that we're going to do? Know, like Darla says, know who our vendors are, know who we're doing business with. As a person or as a business, it makes no difference. Make sure we have antivirus running on our computers and our phones. Whether a person or a business, it doesn't matter. What Ernest says, making sure you have a secure place for your credentials. Most businesses will have that, and we should as individuals too. So everything is in alignment from one person to, a multi-million-dollar corporation. All the rules apply. Understand what things can affect you, and if they do happen, what are you going to do about it? So have a plan, whether it's just a simple understanding of what you're doing, or if it's a full-on cybersecurity plan that meets regulations and requirements that the industry demands, and have a plan.
Final is to be excellent advice, and I thank you all definitely for this conversation. I hope that it's been informative for our listeners as well. Having that plan in place, doing their due diligence, and protecting all the assets, personal identifiable information that they have in place. As we begin to kind of wind down from this conversation, although I would love to learn and dig deeper, any final thoughts for our listeners to share? I know we will have some resources attached to this episode, but just any final thoughts that you think would be of value for our listeners.
One thing, if I may, is to, as Tony was talking about before, when young children specifically get to be an adult and they can have a bad credit history, the same thing, they can also have a bad social media presence as well. So, two things I recommend. One is number one, put a credit freeze on yourself and on your children. That's an easy way to, or on your parents, if you can help walk them through that. My daughter, who passed away after 6 weeks, our first daughter, when she was about to turn 18, I got a hit on her credit rating. Someone was trying to open up a credit card in her name, and she was no longer alive. So I've seen it happen. It happens all the time. So that's one of the things you can do. The other thing is talk to the young people about what they're posting online. It needs to be a parental conversation. I have a teenager right now, and I talk to him about what is he doing online. And I actually sit down and say, "Let me see what you're doing. What social media?" He's not in trouble, but it has to be a conversation because someday this will follow him into his adulthood. So helping him to understand, because most young men don't have much of a frontal lobe. So because of that, trying to help him develop that while in a loving and caring environment. Those are two critical aspects. We can protect both our children and sometimes even our parents.
I would talk about another, especially in the corporate realm, with the backups of your data. Are you making sure that those backups are not corrupted? It's worth That's great. We need to do the backup of all of the data at the system, but we also want to make sure that we can bring the system back up from the data that we had in the backup.
Yeah, like this, Hunter, I would say it's important, as sometimes as confusing or daunting as it can be, we need to take responsibility for ourselves and our information. It is ours. It belongs to us. So, in alignment with what everybody said here today, let's make sure that we're using proper procedures to protect ourselves, like we kind of highlighted here today, that the vendors who we share our data with, who are willing to share our data with, we need to ask questions, make sure that they're using the proper procedures to protect our data. How are you protecting the passwords? How are you protecting my information? Are you backing it up like Darla suggests? Is important, and it is. It's okay to ask our church, how are you storing my information? Are you keeping me safe? Because at the end of the day, all of our data has been exposed at one point in time or another, and whatever's been exposed can be used to expose you further. So take responsibility, be an advocate for yourself, just like you do with your healthcare, with your keys, with your mail, with your identity. Take responsibility and ask questions. Hold other people accountable as well.
Excellent. Excellent points. Very valuable solutions to get everyone's cyber security programs in place and plans in place. So Tony, Darla, Ernest, definitely want to thank you for having this conversation, sitting down with us today and educating our audience a bit more. So thank you so much for your time. For our audience, thanks for listening. If you found value in this conversation, please share it with others who might benefit. You can share this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music. While you're there, please rate the podcast. It helps us out a ton, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode. You can also access this podcast on our website. Simply go to adventist.org, hover over the Safety Resources tab, and then select Let's Talk Solutions Podcast. Here you can listen, watch all our episodes, and share certain episodes or the entire page. Also, in the show notes for this episode, we will share a few links that are related to our conversation today. We'll also include some solutions articles and info sheets. Remember, faith and preparation are not opposites, they're partners. Together, they can help us honor God and navigate the risk of life with confidence. Until next time, stay faithful and stay prepared.